think we know the people we admire, their success, their charm, their carefully crafted legacy. But what happens when the truth doesn't sit above ground? It's buried beneath it. What if the very foundations of greatness were laid with secrets and sealed with silence? This is a story about legacy, about ambition that went too far, and about a son who thought he knew what his father built, until the day he started digging. Power corrupts, reputation protects, but sooner or later, everything buried rises. This is Tilted Frame, and this episode is titled The Contractor.
My father was a man of success. He built more than just houses. He built dreams. Mansions, grand homes for the rich. Celebrities, athletes, people who had everything. But they didn't have a home like his. He didn't just make houses. He made landmarks. Homes that stood as symbols of wealth, symbols of power. People spoke of him like he was untouchable. The best. The one who could do no wrong. And I wanted to be just like him. I admired him, worshipped him. I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd become him. Or at least, something like him. I remember how he would stand there, on the job site, looking at the land. Not a blueprint in sight, just the foundation. And yet, he could see it all. The house that would rise. He could see the rooms, the walls, the windows. He could see the future. And everyone else? They followed him. I followed him. With every project, he built more than a house. He built his name. He built his legacy. I watched him work. Every nail, every brick, every inch of wood. He was meticulous. His hands moved with purpose. He didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened. It was his presence, his ability to make people believe in him. He had a way of making the impossible seem easy, and I saw that. I felt it. I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to build something that would make him proud. One day, I asked him, "Can I help?" He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Soon, son, soon." I waited for that moment, to stand beside him, to build something together. I did well in school. In fact, very well. But I'm modest. I don't like to light my own cigars. I went to the best architecture college, then to university. Every step was a continuation of my desire to follow in my father's footsteps. I was the oldest of 3 kids and the only male. As I grew older, I figured that if I followed him, I could also recover some of the time he'd sacrificed, time he'd lost to work, to build the empire that made him who he was. I thought working together would fix the distance between us. That was the dream, but I was wrong. When I graduated, my father gave me a gift. He set up my own practice, hired the right staff, and gave me my first project. I accepted. I couldn't show ingratitude, but my heart was broken. We were supposed to be playing for the same team, together. Was it me? Did I not amount to the kind of architect fit for his standards? This ate at me, daily. My mother was the first to approach me about it. She saw it. She'd lived it for 25 years of marriage. She knew the pain of absence, of one side always giving, the other always taking. I believe it was her duty to teach me how to navigate this. I told her, at least she had us, my sisters and me. Now that I'd graduated, I'd be alone at distant sites with no one waiting for me. She cried, and she understood. She knew I was in worse shape than she ever was. She gathered courage, said she'd talk to my father. I wanted her to, but I wasn't sure what that would change. For now I focused on my first project, an amazing complex in the heart of Chicago's North Side. A few days went by. My mother reached out. We spoke for a few minutes. She told me my father wanted to see me, in person, to talk about everything I had been feeling. He was upset, not at me, but at himself, for not seeing it sooner, for not understanding what I had wanted out of my career. My mother delivered this news with happiness, with hope that I finally get to spend the time I'd longed for, the time I had always envisioned spending with my father. But before I could even think about it, I was called into an emergency meeting, a project in Chicago, something about permits not adapting to some of my ideas. I found it strange. I always triple-checked my sites and then had my team triple-check. Permits are the lifeblood of any project. You never put pencil to paper to begin a design without knowing everything will be approved. I chalked it up to Illinois regulations, maybe something in the neighborhood, the residents complaining to City Hall about something new coming into their city. Long story short, I made the trip. To my surprise and horror, the day of the meeting, I found out there was no meeting. No one had called for it. The permits were impeccable. The city was 100% behind the project. I thought to myself, how on earth did my staff let this slip? Booking the trip, booking the hotel without checking first to confirm I even needed to be in the city? It didn't add up. Before I left the office, someone came out of the room and asked if I'd like to see the site. We were only 10 minutes away, and they'd drop me off at the airport afterward. I told him that I was planning to stay a few days, that my return flight wasn't until later in the week. He told me to hold on, texted someone. As we made small talk, he got a reply within 5 minutes. He let me know that I was booked for a red-eye back to Phoenix, first class. I had 5 hours to kill. I thanked him and agreed to visit the site. It was more than I expected. The parks surrounding the property were larger than I imagined, giving the building an air of seclusion. That would only enhance my design. We toured the site itself as they poured the foundational concrete. Then we spoke to a few of the workers. We had a quick bite at a local pizza place, and then he drove me to the airport. I made my way back to Phoenix, livid, upset, and ready to explode. As I walked into my office, everyone could read the look on my face. I went straight to my office. I told my secretary to get Tony and Amanda for a meeting, and I wanted it as soon as possible. Tony and Amanda both looked at me as if I were kidding. Within a few minutes, Amanda brought in the original email from the city of Highland Park, Illinois. I looked it over, trying to see if anything stood out. Nothing. It was a working email address, proper domain name, everything checked out. Next, I had Amanda call the city to verify that the email was sent. Yes, it was sent from our offices, they replied, but they had no idea who the person was, a non-existent employee. In other words, everything was real, except the employee. We floated ideas for about an hour after that, but we came back with no answers. On the positive side, though, we implemented a protocol for any future trips or summons. We would triple-check that they came from a valid source. We had a laugh afterwards, but the unease lingered. In the chaos of the last few days, I had forgotten to reach out to my father. I needed to reschedule the meeting. I called him. No answer. I left a message in his office and waited. A week later, I got a reply. My father wouldn't be available for at least 10 weeks. I laughed. I kept calling him, but no answer. Then I called my mother. She was also unable to reach him. I was starting to worry. I went personally into my father's office to investigate. His office was located at the Civic Center Plaza in Scottsdale. Usually there were so many people it looked like a beehive, buzzing with activity. Today, it was eerily quiet. I could hear noise inside the floor as I approached the check-in desk. Nancy had been the office administrator for years. I asked for her. The lady at the desk told me she was busy. I told her I was Mr. Carver's son. She said, "I know, and I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked. Then the doors swung open, and I saw 3 officers carrying out multiple files in big boxes, loading them into the elevator. I ran up to the doors before they closed and made my way inside. The entire floor was filled with police, regular officers, and what I assumed were investigators. I made my way to my father's office, only to discover that it was empty. Not that he wasn't inside, but empty as in, No furniture, no decorations, nothing. Just carpet and 4 walls. Well, 2 walls and the large windows that provided a view of Phoenix. An officer approached me and asked for my credentials. If I was media or an employee. I told him neither. He told me to get out. Then Nancy called my name from the entrance to the meeting room. As I approached her, before I could utter a word, she told me, "Don't say anything to anyone." I asked Nancy, "What in the world is going on?" She motioned for me to keep my voice down and signaled for me to follow her into a small office. She looked at me, her face pale. "There are some serious allegations against your father," she whispered. A large property in Los Angeles had been affected by a landslide about 6 months ago. During the salvage, they found something horrific. 3 bodies buried under the home. The bodies were identified as one of the owners from a local lumber company and 2 of his workers. They'd been missing since 1996. Foul play was always suspected. Stories had circulated that the workers killed their boss and fled the country. But now, everything changed. All 3 of them were found. Nancy looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. "This points directly to your father and those involved with the company," she paused. "Your father is nowhere to be found." I said, "I know. My mother and I can't get a hold of him either." "But why is the entire office being combed like a murder scene? I mean, do they seem to know my father committed the crime?" Nancy looked at me, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, honey, but there's a lot more going on." "That's what the officers told me," she continued. "The search warrants show suspicion of other concerns." "I called Mr. McNarty," she whispered. "He's the lawyer in charge of the legal department for us. As soon as he finds out more, both you and I will know." She paused. "I've known you since you were a little boy, worked with your father for over 20 years. She put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sure this will all pan out. Don't worry." But I was beyond worried. This was extremely out of character for my father to just disappear. That's when I became concerned. There had to be a dark motive behind this. Kidnapping, framing, or worse. I gathered all the details, piecing everything together. It became clear that my father must have gone missing when I was in Chicago. Now, it may sound funny, but my father was unpredictable. He didn't hold a typical 9-to-5 job. He didn't come home for dinner every night. Sometimes he'd fly out to job sites without warning, stay at his office for 48 hours, and return like nothing had happened. But this was different. The strangeness came from the fact that I couldn't reach him. He always answered his phone. He always replied to texts within the hour. I couldn't account for that, and that's what made me worry. I called his cell phone company, but they wouldn't disclose any information until the police made a request. I tried to file a missing person report. But in Arizona, the circumstances were different for someone with an ongoing criminal investigation. I had to sit and wait, and we did for a week. Then I was contacted by Mr. McNarty, the firm's lawyer. He asked me to come into his office at 5 p.m. "We need to have a serious conversation," he said. I obliged. I sat in Mr. McNarty's office. He told me he'd heard a lot of good things about me, how my father always spoke about my design, made it seem like I was the best of the 2 of us. My father told him I'd be an amazing architect. I was taken aback. I'd never heard my dad say that directly. But I took the compliment in stride. After getting a drink, Mr. McNarty sat next to me on a comfortable sofa. He took a sip. Then he began telling me about complications that had recently come to light. He made me sign a document. It stated that anything I heard during this conversation was to stay between us. Not even my father or mother could know. Then, he told me something that stopped me cold. For years, rumors had circulated about strange disappearances. People who worked directly with my father. Nothing concrete, just oddities. One case in particular stood out. A case from New Mexico, back in the early 90s. He looked at me, gauging my reaction. Would I stay and listen, or would I protect my father's legacy and walk out? He had his answer. He continued. There was a wealthy contractor my father had worked with for years. They'd partnered on a large community project in New Mexico near Clayton. 300 luxury condos for a retirement community. Affordable units, with more luxuries than expected. Within a year of completion, all the units sold. The demand was so high, a few were resold before construction even finished, at a profit. My father's portion, 46%. The rest was split between the contractor and two partners. But a problem arose. The final payment was never made by my father. Strangely, the contractor died a few weeks after the payment was due. The portion owed by my father was taken from the contractor's estate. The contractor paid for himself, and my father. But my father still received his full portion, thanks to the way the documents were set up. This enraged the contractor's family, but my father, he sold his percentage, made millions, and never addressed the debt. Mr. McNarty carefully removed a fancy cigarette case from his pocket. He offered me one. I declined. "Mind if I smoke?" he asked. "Go right ahead," I said. He lit his cigarette, and within seconds I was met with the sweet smell of freshly burned tobacco leaves. I took a deep breath. Somehow the smell reminded me of my youth. I was abruptly pulled back to the present when Mr. McNarty exhaled a mouthful of smoke and continued speaking. "There's another case, a peculiar one, in 2005. This time it involved your father and another disappearance. It was a woman, the wife of a wealthy landowner near West Palm Beach. My father had been trying to secure a large piece of real estate from this man, but the price was well above my father's range. The meetings between them went on for months. Then, as my father was about to move on from the purchase, he was contacted by the landowner. He invited my father for a weekend getaway, a few days in Florida. During the weekend, there was a boating accident. The wife of the landowner was the only one who perished. Her body was found floating 20 miles off the coast 2 days later. The odd thing is this," Mr. McNarty continued. "After the accident, the landowner agreed to sell the entire plot to your father for 20% below market value. Was it grief, remorse, or something else?" He paused. "Was the accident planned, staged, or was it paid for to lower the land value?" "You see," Mr. McNarty said, leaning forward, "these are the things that kept me up at night. But I kept quiet. Until now. I'm starting to piece all the puzzles together. And frankly, I'm not liking how the picture is beginning to look." What McNarty told me next left me completely baffled. "As you are aware," he said, then continued, "when your father gifted you your corporation, he placed a large sum of starting capital." "Yes," I replied, "quite a lot of starting backing indeed." McNarty looked at me, then said, "There's a lot more money in your company than you realize. You're only allowed to see the top portion of your finances. There is a hidden layer which you personally have to ask the bank to reveal to you. It is your money entrusted to you via your corporation, but not visible on your day-to-day account." "Do you know how much more there is in that particular division of funds?" I shook my head. No, I wasn't aware. McNarty's reply stunned me. $1.7 billion. The air in the room turned silent. It felt as if the smoke from his cigarette had frozen in midair. $1.7 billion? I asked, unable to believe what I was hearing. That's correct, McNarty said. 98% of all your father's wealth, plus titles to over 1,200 properties. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Let's just say that you and your future generations won't ever worry about finances. I was speechless. Now, McNarty continued, this isn't strange. In fact, it's brilliant. No one could pursue this gain from your father under any circumstances. But, I said, sensing the shift. But, McNarty went on, it does point to culpability, and the fact that perhaps there was a darker layer to your father's life that we're just beginning to uncover. I left the meeting with more questions than answers. This certainly pointed to my father securing his wealth in a way that would be untouchable by legal fees or criminal suits, should he be found guilty. Or found at all. I headed to my parents' house and discussed everything with my mother and my sisters. For the next few days, everything remained uneventful. We still had no confirmation or contact about my father's whereabouts. Everyone was preparing for the worst. But about 2 weeks later, the pressure increased. More bodies were being found in the foundations of construction sites across various states. The connections were being made. The timeline of construction, the missing persons reports, the unfinished properties from around the same time. In total, 5 more bodies were discovered. The media, like sharks to blood, started camping outside my parents' house night and day, waiting for an interview or a snippet of controversy from us, the family. My personal business was affected too. The Chicago contract was canceled. It wasn't a financial loss, not that I needed the money, but it was a reputation hit, one that would be hard to recover from. Against my mother's will, I decided to become transparent. I didn't want to hide behind lawyers. I didn't want them to become my personal voice. So, on the 3rd day of being stalked by the media, I decided to walk right up to our gates. I calmly expressed my desire to talk. I hand-selected 5 media representatives and invited them into our home. A civilized, well-planned Q&A session. After everything I knew was dispelled, including my financial information, I became a sort of hero due to my transparency. People could see that I had nothing to hide. With the exception of my father's accusations, our family was cleared from public scrutiny. My name and the name of my company was held in high esteem again. I even got a call from Chicago asking if I'd reconsider the project. I politely declined. If you wouldn't stick by me, when all eyes saw me as an enemy, I have no interest in doing business with you. That, too, made it into the news. Suddenly, we were flooded with calls for upcoming projects. My mother was proud of my decision to be real. She congratulated me on my fearlessness. About a year later, we still hadn't heard anything about my father. He had become another high-profile missing person case. The families of those who had perished, whose bodies had been found, were provided large financial sums through the dissolution of my father's company and the remaining 2% of his wealth. They were satisfied. No further legal issues on the horizon. I ended up hiring Mr. McNarty as our company lawyer. He became a trusted friend. We still don't know how culpable my father was, how deeply involved he became. But he remained guilty in my eyes. We learned that by killing those who partnered with him on his projects, the money owed to them would be nullified if they passed away. This was written into every contract. The landowners, those who provided the lumber, the steel, the work, the powerful names in the financial side of construction, not the workers, but the money behind the project. It was, in an evil way, a genius plan. A few weeks later, that's when I received the call. Am I speaking with Stephen Carver? This is Stephen, I replied. Who is this? We met in Chicago, he said. I met you during that strange trip you had. We went to dinner and to the site of your project. Oh, yes, of course, I remember, I replied. Before he could utter another word, I cut him off. I have no interest in finishing the project, but I appreciate your call. He quickly responded, "That's not why I'm calling." Now I was intrigued. "How can I help you?" I asked. "You will never find out who I am," he said. "I know enough time has passed that you wouldn't recognize my face anymore. I never really worked at the contracting firm in Chicago. I made sure the cameras were off when I met you in the office that day. The restaurant we went to didn't have surveillance, and the streets I took to get to the project and to the airport didn't have cameras either. What I'm saying is, I'm just a memory of your life." I was extremely confused. I became upset and replied, "I have no idea what you're going on about, and frankly, I'm not in the mood for any games. I could care less about identifying you. What do you want?" "Well," he said, "I got what I wanted already. I got you to Chicago. I called, arranged, and booked your flight. In fact, your return flight was also pre-booked, the first-class trip, remember?" I did remember. I kept listening. He continued, "Do you remember when the foundations of your project were being laid, when we both saw the cement being placed?" "Well, of course I do," I replied. He continued, "At that time, unbeknownst to you, you witnessed your father being buried by a slow wave of heavy, unforgivable gray mountain." I froze. My heart was racing. I stopped what I was doing and sat down as I listened, feeling every drop of cold sweat engulf me. "Do I have your attention now?" he asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was back in Chicago on that particular day, trying to recall everything from that moment when the foundations were placed. His voice broke through again. "My father was a business partner of your father. He also disappeared, but I haven't found him yet. I know somewhere his body is also buried under a beautiful building. You can call it revenge," he continued, in a weird kind of way, because, well, you're not the guilty party. But someone knowing that your father was able to see you in the distance as he drowned in his sins must have been a hell of a way for him to go. And I take pleasure in that." The phone went dead. The call ended, and I was left holding the phone, trying to process the information. It took me a few minutes to regain my composure. I knew this wasn't a prank call. As I searched for the number that had called me, it said no user ID. To be honest, trying to trace that number would likely lead to a burner phone anyway. This man knew how to cover his tracks. He wouldn't make a simple mistake when he called. I thought about reporting the crime to the Chicago Police Department, but something inside me stopped me from dialing the number. What good would it do? Rekindle the story in the news? More interviews? More media fanfare? And if they did find my father's body, what kind of funeral would we give him? Would I want to put my mother and sisters through that? A sudden sense of peace washed over me. The thought of leaving it alone felt right, and so I did. It's been a few years now since everything came to light. My mother found new love, my sisters married, my firm, one of the top in the Southwest. We just got a bid to build the Olympic Center for an upcoming series of tournaments before the 2032 Phoenix Olympics. And I too got married, and now have 3 kids, a son and 2 daughters, the same as my parents. As a side note, I ended up finding out who called me that day, years ago, the person responsible for my father's death. I went looking for him. Let's just say he made a nice foundation for a children's hospital in Chicago.
Some men build homes, others build myths. Nathaniel Carver did both. He was the kind of man people admired from a distance, successful, visionary, untouchable. But beneath the polished concrete and steel was something else, something buried. His empire wasn't just constructed, it was engineered. To hide things, to silence people, to disappear them. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't come crashing down. It seeped, slow, relentless, like water through cracked foundation walls. What Nathaniel built was more than structures. He built a legacy that bled into the lives of everyone around him. His absence was as loud as his presence, and his son, Stephen, was left to carry not just the name, but the consequences. Stephen could have looked away. He could have clung to the wealth, the reputation, the comfort of not knowing. But he didn't. He chose to ask the hard questions. He chose to dig. And what he found wasn't just murder. It wasn't just greed. It was the realization that success without ethics is just rot dressed up in glass. He stood in the middle of it all, son, heir, victim, witness, and eventually judge. The story ends with a hospital, a place meant for healing, but underneath it, maybe something else. A final act of revenge, or justice with a twist of irony. We're not told, and maybe that's the point. Because The Contractor doesn't offer easy answers. It asks hard questions. What do we inherit when we inherit power? Can legacy be cleaned or only rewritten? Is silence more dangerous than the crime itself? And when justice becomes personal, how far are we willing to go? Thanks for listening to Tilted Frame. If this story challenged you, share it. If it left you uneasy, sit with it. If it made you wonder what your own legacy might be, you're exactly where we wanted you. Because in the end, the most dangerous structures aren't the ones that collapse. They're the ones that stand, flawless on the surface, while everything underneath is rotting away. What's beneath your foundation? And who's going to dig it up? Until next time.